Hello and welcome to the Musical Instrument Investigator. Today we are on the website of Amati Auctions based in the UK, and we're going to have a look at their affordable auction. This is the auction for things which maybe need to be repaired or have unknown provenance, or maybe wood and kind of other accessories and things like that, lesser value items. This auction has been kind of live since the 17th of September and it's due to finish on the 29th of September, which is in 2 days time. The buyer's fee is 22% for this, and obviously make sure you check about shipping and things for stuff from the UK. I think there's just about 200 or just under 200 items in this auction, so why don't we just crack on and see what we can find. We're going to see some of the bids already so far because there's only a couple of days left, so that should be interesting. So here we have a cello unlabeled. Can have a look at some of the other pictures as well. If we see anything really exciting, then we can look into that a bit more. A cello labelled Robert A. Stanley, bass and bow maker, Manchester, 1920. It's got £650 there. We'll have a quick look. Replacement button. You can see some repairs and other things there. Open cracks. We won't look at all of these condition reports, but good to look at a few. A cello labelled Hans Wagner, and we might just zoom out a little bit in general, because then we can click on the pictures a bit more, make it a bit easier. A cello unlabelled. A cello labelled C. Lamb. Looks fairly standard and quite new. A cello unlabelled. And a cello labelled Thierry Apari. Interesting back on that one, that's popular. £1,100 so far, with a couple of days left to go. Now we're on to a viola. Let's just make sure that we got that right. Yep, we have a viola unlabelled. Looks to be quite modern. Another viola unlabelled. £80 is the bid on that. A viola labelled the Elysia. Another modern thing. A viola unlabelled. £240 is the bid on that, so that's popular. Looks a little interesting. Viola unlabelled. Quite a bright varnish on this one. Viola unlabelled comes with a bow. Looks fairly standard. A viola labelled Artia. That's a very low quality trade instrument for sure. A viola unlabelled. Fairly standard, 475 at the moment. A viola labelled Antonius Stradivarius. A violin unlabelled. This is an interesting looking violin to me. In any case, it does have some interesting traits about it. 170 is the current bid. Let's just quickly have a look at the condition report. It's been replaced a bit on the scroll, some closed cracks and pinned scroll. A violin labelled Friedrich Kockendorfer. A violin unlabelled, sold with a bow. A violin unlabelled again, also with a bow. £190 there. Violin labelled Antonius Stradivarius. Violin labelled Johann Georg Vogler. Nasty button repair there. Interesting looking scroll on the eyes. Violin labelled Sam Thompson. Sam Thompson, St Paul's Churchyard. Nasty button going on there. 70 is the current bid on that. A 3/4 sized violin unlabelled. A violin labelled Ernst Gleisel. Slightly curious looking shape there. A violin labelled Johann Stefan Thumhard. It's a very kind of narrow looking instrument there. A violin unlabelled. And a violin labelled copy of Antonius Stradivarius. It's pretty standard. Maybe we can get rid of this notification. That's going to make it a bit easier. No, it's on everyone. Okay, violin unlabelled. Now this is an interesting instrument to me because shape-wise it looks a bit like a kind of Perry and Wilkinson type thing, but the scroll doesn't really fit in. But potentially, because it's had a button replaced, that could be where a Perry and Wilkinson brand would be, but I could be wrong. It just has this slightly kind of odd squarish shoulders like some of the Perry and Wilkinsons had seen, but could be wrong. Front is half edged, closed cracks, and big button replacement there, so it's in a bit of a mess. A violin unlabelled. A violin labelled J. Griggs. Strong varnish colour there. Some interesting items so far. A violin labelled Nachemung von Fissit Anon 1735. Very Guarneri F-holes there. A violin unlabelled. Interestingly positioned F-holes there. A violin labelled Medifino, standard kind of French trade type thing. A 3/4 violin labelled Karl Hofener. A violin labelled Copy Antonius Stradivarius. Some over the top antiquing on that one. Violin unlabelled. Striking back on that one. Some repairs there. Another violin unlabelled. Curious shape there. Neck graft. And a violin unlabelled again. A violin unlabelled again. 210 the current bid on this. We haven't seen anything outrageously in price yet. Violin unlabelled. This is a very cool looking scroll on this one, I have to say. It's very interesting. Repaired woodworm on body, lots of inserts, so it's in a bit of a mess. And it's a curious one with that scroll, but it's in definitely a bit of a state there. Violin unlabelled, pretty standard. A violin unlabelled. Violin unlabelled again. Violin labelled Nicholas Amati. A violin labelled Antoine Stradarius. That's an interesting one. Violin labelled The Apollo. Rushworth and Draper. A violin unlabelled. Violin unlabelled again. A small violin labelled the London Violin Co. A violin unlabelled. Violin labelled the Stentor Student. A 3/4 violin labelled the Maidstone. A violin unlabelled. Very uninteresting, these last few. Violin labelled at Gewa. It's a modern instrument there. I'm sure it's probably in fine playing condition. Another violin labelled Gewa. Bit heavy on the old varnish there. A violin unlabelled. Two 1/10 size violins there. Two 1/8 size violins. A 1/4 size violin labelled Primavera. So this is all very modern, kind of cheap stuff, these ones. All pretty standard. A violin labelled Dulcis et Fortis. A violin labelled Jacobus Steiner. It's got the lion head, definitely in the Steiner style. A violin stamped JGF. A violin labelled Luigi Azzola. Torino, interesting back. It's a curious looking violin. A 3/4 violin unlabelled. Violin labelled Joseph Guarneris. And it has the Guarneri style F holes, that's for sure. A violin labelled Albani. That's in a bit of a state, unfortunately. A violin unlabelled. A violin branded Giuseppe Gandolfi. A violin unlabelled. Violin labelled Andre Connaught. 180 on that. So once again, one of these vibrant varnish jobs. A violin labelled M. Salustri. We've seen some of these violins sold before at Amati. A violin labelled Solani Constantino. Fisse in Ascoli Picenzo, 1902. Sold with a certificate. Interesting, this is a bit different. Things like new wood there. Who is this certificate from? Interesting. Looks a bit vague. A violin unlabelled. Definitely a lot of violins. A violin labelled Ewald Bruckner. A violin labelled Schuster & Co. A violin labelled F.R. Herlich. Standard. Violin unlabelled. Another standard type thing. A violin labelled Johann Ulrich Fichtel. A violin unlabelled. More standard-y type stuff. Violin unlabelled. Another funky varnish job there. A violin unlabelled. More standard type things. A violin unlabelled in a bit of a state there, front of that. Looks a bit interesting. 85, a half-size violin unlabelled. With the big Klotz brand at the back. Violin unlabelled. That went a bit weird. And a violin unlabelled. And let's go to that and a bit odd. Violin labelled Nicholas Armatus. There's the back and there's the scroll. Violin branded R. Duke. This is slightly interesting, but this has quite a bad bit of damage here. Soundpost crack at the back, closed. Cheek patches, unfortunately revarnished or varnish fiddled with. Not really a good look. Violin unlabelled. Violin labelled Blessing. This is real low range kind of Chinese stuff. Violin unlabelled. Another violin unlabelled. Another violin unlabelled. Definitely a lot of violins. 3/4 violin unlabelled, double purfling there. A violin labelled Antonio Stradivarius. More of the same. Violin labelled Layanti, Dresden. A 3/4 violin labelled Matteo Goffrilla. A violin labelled Antonio Stradivarius. Definitely a lot of violins. A violin labelled Rosé. Half-size violin labelled the Stenton Student 1. 3/4 size violin unlabelled. A violin unlabelled. Violin unlabelled again. The Steiner brand at the back. Surprised we haven't seen any bows as yet. A 3/4 size violin labelled Dulcis S Fortis. A violin unlabelled. A violin labelled Wang Ziqiao del Jesu, handcrafted by Master Luthier, apparently. It's got 130 bids on it. Violin unlabelled. A violin labelled Boozy and Hawks. A child-size violin unlabelled. Child-size violin unlabelled. A violin unlabelled. A violin unlabelled. Another violin unlabelled. Really quite a lot of violins in this auction. Violin unlabelled, and it's been a while since any of them were too exciting, unfortunately. Violin unlabelled again. It's all much of the same, unfortunately. A violin labelled Antonio Strad. That's pretty. Well, that's pretty terrible. A violin unlabelled. So the scroll's got a bit of a break there. A child's violin there. Half-size violin unlabelled. Here we go, a Baroque cello bow unstamped. Let's just have a look at that. Current bid £50. It looks fairly standard. Looks like a Chinese one. to me. Nickel mounted cello bow stamped GA Fretschner. Nickel mounted cello bow unstamped. Nickel mounted cello bow unstamped. A silver mounted cello bow stamped Alfred Knoll. A nickel mounted cello bow stamped R. Paysold. Nickel mounted viola bow unstamped. A silver mounted cello bow stamped Luteria. Nickel mounted viola bow stamped Hoya. Silver mounted viola bow unstamped. A silver mounted violin bow unstamped. A silver mounted violin bow unstamped. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Erich Steiner. Nickel mounted violin bow unstamped. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped J. Storr. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Otto Durschmidt. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Taut. A nickel mounted violin bow unstamped. A nickel mounted cello bow stamped W. Seifert. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Paris. Nickel mounted violin bow unstamped. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Taut. Nickel mounted violin bow unstamped. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Dodd. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Dodd. And a nickel mounted violin bow stamped Viome. Nickel mounted violin bow stamped Viome Paris. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped La Roche, France. Nickel mounted violin bow stamped K. Penzel. A silver mounted violin bow unstamped. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Bausch. A silver mounted violin bow faintly stamped. Silver mounted violin bow unstamped. A nickel mounted violin bow unstamped. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Tubbs. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Taut. A silver mounted violin bow unstamped. A silver mounted violin bow stamped Valiostro. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped A. Rao. A violin stick with no mount. A nickel mounted violin bow faintly stamped A. Paris. A nickel mounted violin bow stamped Viome. A silver mounted violin bow stamped Aug Edwin Praja. 12 violin bows of varying lengths. 20 violin bows varying lengths. 17 violin bows in 3 sticks varying lengths. 15 child bows varying length. 15 cello bows and 2 sticks varying lengths. 12 violin bows varying length. A mandolin labelled Phil Ferrari & Co. A Universal Dictionary of Violin Bowmakers. 2 books, Antonio Stradivarius' Life and Work and Dictionary of Contemporary Violin Bowmakers. Cremona Luteria Musica in una cita di arte. Benjamin Banks, The Salisbury Violin Maker, good book. The Cooper Collection. German and Austrian Violin Makers. Violin Making in Scotland 1750 to 1915, also a good book. Violin Makers of the Guarneri family. World of Musical Instruments. Old Musical Instruments. You Can Make a Stradivarius Violin. 2 books of violoncello and its history and violin fraud. The Hill Collection of Musical Instruments in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford. Beautiful Italian Violins. 2 indices books of Mirko Luthiers from 1886 and 1896. Les Violins. The Amadeus, 40 Years in Pictures and Words. Dictionary of Violin and Bowmakers. Monograph Collections, Volumes 1, 2 and 3. Dictionary of Contemporary Violin and Bowmakers. Violins by Viome. A large paper print of an alto viol by Henry J. That's interesting. A violin case branded J.P. Givier & Co. Limited. A 2-slot bow case. A 2-slot bow case. A 2-slot bow case. A 6-slot bow case. 2 double violin cases. A violin case branded Concord. A full-size violin case and 2 half-size violin cases branded Leonardo. 3 1/8 violin cases. 3/4 violin cases. 2 half-size violin cases, 1/4 violin case. 3 1/16 violin cases. A violin case by BAM. Half-size violin case by Stentor. I think that's it. So 208 lots in the end, so just a little bit over 200. So yeah, an interesting auction. Nothing outrageously jumping out. I do like one of the first violin lots. I think that is quite interesting, this one here. And there's also the other one which had the interesting scroll. I think these are definitely to me curious violins. But yeah, if you're interested in the auction, I'll put a link in the description and see what you think. So once again, thanks for having a look at the Amati auction with me. Until next time, ciao for now. Bye. Many thanks for tuning in to the Musical Instrument Investigator. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please like, subscribe and turn on notifications, and watch out for the next video coming soon.